I spoke at the Heritage Foundation in February 2014. After my talk, I was unexpectedly met in the lobby by Chinese television with a mic thrust in my face. They wanted an interview. Why was I talking so much about China? As soon as I finished the interview, I was approached by a well-dressed Chinese woman with a local university position and a business card, which she handed me. She commented that I sure had a lot to say about China in my talk. And yes, I was very clear in explaining the economic war already underway and the threat posed by China. But what bothered me was all this attention I was getting from Chinese personnel, all this interest in my talk and in my book. So I asked the lady with the business card why she was there, and she said that she always follows the Heritage Foundation whenever China is discussed, anything that might be of interest to China. She said, "You're making a lot of points about unrestricted warfare." And I was. So I asked her if I said anything that was factually inaccurate. She smiled and said no. Then I looked more closely at the business card, and I looked at her, and I said, "You're Chinese PLA, aren't you? Chinese People's Liberation Army?" She just smiled. And I knew instantly she was a part of the Chinese PLA. She was sent there to monitor me. And I asked, "Look, am I going to get whacked? Is the Chinese government going to come after me?" And she smiled again and she said, "No." I said, "Why not?" She said, "Because no one will believe you." I was curious. If everything I said was true and she agreed with it, why wouldn't anyone believe me? She said, "Because we own half this town." I said, "Who owns the other half?" She said, "The Saudis." That was more than 5 years ago. And I had been pounding the table about the China threat in the Pentagon, at the DIA, at the FBI, with Congress. Wherever I went, I said, China is a threat. And I was always told, no, China is our friend. They would never harm us. The truth is that 5 years ago, I had freedom of speech to voice my opinion. But those days are waning. The Chinese Communist Party is now aggressively attempting to control America's speech, and they're not alone. Join me in the Economic War Room as we discuss the economic war on free speech, how it will impact you, and what you should do about it. In episode 19, we said, do not take the mark of the progressive beast. We talked about the Orwellian attacks on our First Amendment, whether it's political correctness or shaming or banning, punishing by the media, social media, or politicians. Sadly, things have only gotten worse. Now it's not just Facebook, Google, or YouTube trying to control what you think and what you say. And it's not just easily triggered progressives. We actually have powerful foreign governments demanding that we only say things that they approve. And we're seeing the most radical elements in America literally going ballistic if even their own dare speak outside of the approved narrative. We will go through 3 powerful examples where Americans are being coerced through economic warfare to sit down and shut up. Then we'll discuss how we together can defend our constitutional right to free speech. And if we work together to teach the next generation, we can ensure that our children and grandchildren enjoy the liberty that we so greatly cherish. You've heard the phrase, Big Brother is always watching. What you didn't know is that Big Brother is as likely in Beijing as it is at Google. 5 years ago, I was being watched at the Heritage Foundation. Now, everyone is under Chinese surveillance. You think I'm exaggerating? Well, consider Roy Jones, a $14 an hour Marriott employee in Omaha, Nebraska. Roy hit like on a social media post. The problem was that China did not like that post. Marriott got the word and Roy was fired. This is according to the Wall Street Journal, and let me read. Beijing. Roy Jones, 49 years old, never thought a $14 an hour job running social media accounts for Marriott International would require for him to know global politics. That was before he used an official company account to like a post that applauded Marriott for listing Tibet as a country rather than a part of China in an online survey. In other words, Roy's crime was he liked a tweet that applauded his employer. Oh my goodness. Marriott says listing Tibet as a country was a mistake, and Mr. Jones has said the same thing of liking the post. Mr. Jones paid for the error with his livelihood. Marriott fired him on January 14th. According to a Chinese internet expert at the University of California at Berkeley, he said, not only can't you speak freely inside of China, but you can't even speak freely outside of China. And that's really bad. Now, quoting again from the Journal, Mr. Jones said he typically reviewed up to 300 tweets a shift and doesn't recall liking that specific one, although he concedes he probably did. On January 11th, the Shanghai Municipal Tourism Administration said it questioned Marriott representatives over the matter and ordered the company to publicly apologize and seriously deal with the people responsible. Marriott was also forced to suspend online booking services for 1 week in Greater China, its largest market outside of North America, with nearly 300 hotels. Following the episode, Marriott said it terminated its contract with the Canadian vendor. Mr. Jones said he was fired after a Marriott human resource director interviewed him about the incident. This job was all I had, Mr. Jones said. I'm at the age now where I don't have many opportunities. Think about this. His job was to look for posts and tweets that liked Marriott and to click like. That was his job. He did that job and he got fired because China didn't like what he said. It's only gotten worse. We've talked about how Hong Kong citizens have been demanding the freedoms that they were supposed to be given after reverting to Chinese control. This is something we should all agree upon. But if you work with the National Basketball Association, the NBA, you no longer have the right to side with freedom. You heard the story, which is important, but the reaction is even more telling. As you know, it all started on October 4th with Daryl Morey, the general manager of the NBA's Houston Rockets. He sent what should have been an uncontroversial support for freedom in Hong Kong. In fact, the tweet said nothing other than, "Fight for freedom, stand with Hong Kong." What happened next was nothing short of amazing. The Chinese information warfare apparatus shifted into high gear to destroy Morey, the Rockets, and the NBA. The Wall Street Journal documented 170,000 tweets to or about Morey over the next week. Many, if not most of the tweets sent to Morey were from virtually non-existent accounts. Why? Quoting Ben Nemo, senior fellow at the Atlantic Council's Digital Forensic Research Lab. Ben said this is classic intimidation tactic, mass posting at someone's account to scream them into silence. Morey deleted his tweet in less than an hour after it had become clear that he'd stoked China's wrath, again quoting from the Journal. So you can look at the chart. This is the chart says enormous spike from the first tweet, and then even when he apologizes, he did not intend to offend the Rockets, his fans, or his friends in China. Even more piling on. The Chinese were going to make an example of him using Twitter activity. So, did we close ranks to defend our fellow American, Daryl Morey, who was standing for freedom? Sadly, no. You know how professional athletes are all about protesting America? They say it's free speech to kneel during the national anthem. LeBron James has been really strong on this. So what did he say about Daryl Morey standing for freedom in Hong Kong? Basically, he told him to sit down and be quiet. It may be free speech to diss America, but don't speak a word against our Chinese masters. Here's a quote from LeBron. Yes, we do have freedom of speech, but at times there are ramifications for the negative that can happen when you're not thinking about others, when you're only thinking about yourself. So many people could have been harmed, not only financially, but physically, emotionally, spiritually. So just be careful what we tweet and what we say. Now, there's a video of LeBron, and it's just pretty shocking. How was Daryl Morey thinking only of himself by tweeting solidarity with the desire for freedom in Hong Kong? Let me translate LeBron. Daryl, you've upset the Chinese. They make us money. Keeping the NBA rich is more important than the lives of the people in Hong Kong. Don't be selfish. Isn't that crazy? There you have it. Economic warfare against our First Amendment rights. The Chinese communists are really good at it, and they're only getting bolder. They also lashed out against a video game player, getting him fired for supporting freedom in Hong Kong. Notice a pattern? Here are the facts. Activision Blizzard is a huge video and online gaming company. They have big tournaments worldwide. In fact, the gaming business itself exceeds $150 billion a year in annual revenues. One popular game is called Hearthstone, and it's owned by Blizzard Entertainment. People compete. There are big prizes. Recently, a 21-year-old player named Chung Ing Wei won $10,000 as the top prize in the tournament. That's a pretty big deal for a 21-year-old. Chung is a Hong Kong native, and when he was interviewed about his win, he said, "Liberate Hong Kong, the revolution of our time." What happened next? He was stripped of his prize money and banned for 1 year from playing the game that he had mastered. After that, 3 other college players of Hearthstone stood up, held up a sign that said, "Free Hong Kong, boycott Blizz," during a competition. They've been banned for 6 months. This is the pattern. The intention is to intimidate and to silence. But this is also a signal, I think, that the Chinese communists could be losing their grip. Remember what happened to me in 2014? The nice member of the People's Liberation Army posing as a Chinese study professor approaches me and tells me that they own half of D.C., so no one's going to believe me when I warned about China. That was then. This is now. Now we have a new sheriff in town with President Trump, and China has got to be concerned. This is the time we need to double down in standing up for free speech. There's one more example about attempted Chinese censorship, and it comes from what may be the most irreverent show on television. It's a Comedy Central cartoon known as South Park. On a recent episode, South Park poked fun at China just like they do everything else, including President Trump, American history, politics, religion. They make fun of conservatives. They make fun of liberals, and the humor is often very crude. They've gone after Scientology, Islam, and pop culture. But the Chinese communists, they weren't amused. The episode Banned in China, B-A-N-D in China, was about a music group in China, and it got the series banned, B-A-N-N-E-D, in China, meaning they were knocked off the air. I've seen clips from the show, and they're very, very funny, even if very crude.
I can't do it anymore, you guys. I can't even think with the Chinese government censoring everything I write.
So there's not going to be a biopic movie for us?
It's so wrong, you know? I mean, we live in a time where the only movies that us American kids go see are ones that are approved by China. Yeah, it's like China is the new MPAA.
Stinks to say goodbye to all that biopic money and glory.
'Cause I'm the king of Bigger Bang, let's not fight, I'm just a Bigger Bang Bang.
Cut! This is all wrong.
No, it's good, kids. They're loving it.
Yeah, but I can't sell my soul like this. I want to get away from that farm, more than anything. But it's not worth living in a world where China controls my country's art.
什么？你这个看不起我？
I don't care how many people you have. I've got something in me that just won't let me be a part of all this.
Yeah, whatever it is, I got it too. Yeah.
I want to be proud of who we are, guys. And anybody who would betray their ideals just to make money in China isn't worth a lick of spit.
This episode, however, has become a rallying cry for Hong Kong residents, and it's being screened on the streets of Hong Kong even today. The funniest part is that South Park chose to apologize via Twitter, essentially mocking the NBA strategy and their cowardly response. So here's the tweet from South Park. Like the NBA, we welcome the Chinese censors into our homes and into our hearts. We too love money more than freedom and democracy. She doesn't look like Winnie the Pooh at all. Tune into our 300th episode this Wednesday at 10. Long live the great Communist Party of China. May this autumn's sorghum harvest be bountiful. We good now, China? South Park got it right. What's amazing is that this Comedy Central cartoon is the message of courage for us to stand up for freedom and not kowtow to the economic warfare of China. This is about moral courage. Can you imagine if the people of Hong Kong, by standing for liberty and their principles, could be the spark that ends the communist blight in China? Sadly, there are big American companies willing to extinguish freedom for the hope of making a little extra money. What's happening in China is a sellout of American principles, but it's not the only sellout. We also have this very recent example of political correctness run amok, and this time it comes from a surprising source. In episode 19, we told you about the SPLC, the Southern Poverty Law Center, how they label groups as hate groups and they attempt to stifle free speech. Well, they're at it again, despite being seriously discredited. There were whistleblowers at the SPLC talking about how bad this group really is. The Washington Post wrote articles about how they weren't necessarily judging all that fairly. They piled up huge amounts of money and they've stuck it in offshore bank accounts. This is a money-making enterprise that has actually sponsored people to go attempt mass murder. They didn't purposely do it, but people read the SPLC posts, people quoted them, and used their information as motivation. Not the SPLC, I'm not saying that they tried to make this happen, but people read their stuff and they went to the Family Research Council, a guy named Floyd Corker, and attempted mass murder because the Family Research Council was falsely labeled a hate group. Now often the SPLC links up with other groups. One of them is CAIR, the Council on American Islamic Relations, CAIR. It's an unindicted co-conspirator from the Holy Land Foundation case, and a few years ago, in 2014, the United Arab Emirates actually designated the American CAIR group as a terrorist organization due to its ties with Hamas and the Muslim Brotherhood. So, the UAE calls CAIR a terrorist organization, but most of Washington is afraid to get on their bad side. Little wonder. CAIR uses economic influence and threats of hate labels to stop American free speech. So they teamed up with the SPLC and they banned a group called Act for America from having a banquet at a well-known resort in Florida. Yes, Mar-a-Lago. Mar-a-Lago was going to feature Michelle Malkin, who was a host on the old CRTV where we started Economic War Room before it became Blaze. Michelle Malkin, who's a great conservative speaker, who's a great writer, who's a great thinker. CAIR and the SPLC labeled her a white supremacist? Really? And they had her stopped from speaking at Mar-a-Lago. Look, she's a fellow traveler with us in proclaiming the truth. I met her recently at a conference. She's trying to educate America, and CAIR and the SPLC are trying to silence her. Malkin commented by saying she attacked a chilling cancer culture campaign being waged against patriotic journalists and activists, and apparently not even Mar-a-Lago is a safe space. The SPLC and CAIR seek to silence and eliminate political opponents by redefining criticism of their agenda and tactics as hate, she said. Now we know that President Trump is a big proponent of free speech. He uses it for himself all the time. Yet, a disgraced organization such as the SPLC, teaming with a group designated as a terrorist organization by the United Arab Emirates, was able to silence one of America's strongest conservatives, Michelle Malkin, at the president's Florida home. That's just how endangered free speech has become in America today. And that's just our second example. Our third example is a montage of craziness. Did you know that Ellen DeGeneres was basically told to sit down and shut up because she dared to speak civilly with former President Bush? Yes, leftist Ellen DeGeneres, an outspoken, progressive lesbian, was attacked and denounced for saying it's okay to have a polite conversation with a former president of this country. Crazy. Then there's the brouhaha from the town of Oak Park. Let me read from the local paper in Oak Park on October 8th, 2019. It says the Oak Park Village Board members have been at odds since April over what traditionally has been the ritual post-election readoption of the village's diversity statement. Trustee Susan Buchanan, who questioned why white male trustees were offering opinions on the wording of the diversity statement, said, "I'm so tired of hearing two white men tell us what systems of oppression are." For Christ's sake, no, you don't know what systems of oppression are. You haven't been oppressed, she said. This is like you guys wanting to tell us what it's like to have a menstrual cycle. You don't know what you're talking about. And the town applauded. All they wanted to do was to edit a single sentence, change just a word or two. They weren't trying to water it down, they were just trying to make it correct. The mayor, who by the way is a native of Palestine, tried to intervene, but he was told that he was too light-skinned to have a say. In other words, you can't speak if you're a white male, or if you aren't white but you have light skin, or if you're a man at all, or if you're a woman like Ellen, even if you're a lesbian. Really, you shouldn't be allowed to speak unless you carry the progressive viewpoint. Even then, we'll argue over a single word. That's how simply crazy it's become in America today. So what should we do about it? First, we've got to get educated. Go back and watch episode 19 again and download the free battle plan from that show. There's a lot of great information there. Also, there's great information from our good friend, General Robert Spalding. We featured General Spalding in twice recently, once in episode 52 and again in episode 57. He has a new book out titled Stealth War, How China Took Over While America's Elite Slept. General Spalding uncovers the tactics used by China to silence opposition. Second, we have to stand up for what we believe. We cannot remain silent. Michelle Malkin is speaking out, and you should too. South Park stood up. A popular German DJ had the courage to like the South Park tweet, and he got banned in China. But that's okay. It took courage, and there was a price to pay. But freedom is worth it. It takes courage. Like the courage displayed by Turkish exiled NBA star Enes Kanter. Kanter stood up to the league and LeBron James on the side of freedom. He's exiled because he regularly criticizes the Erdogan regime. In fact, his family in Turkey was put in jail. He can't travel with his team to certain countries, and there are multiple threats against his life. Speaking up for him takes courage, but he spoke up. The third thing we must do is that we must support companies that allow and support our values and avoid companies that oppose our values, both with our spending and our investing. Why are we investing in communist China? Why are we asking our servicemen and women and veterans and government employees to put money in communist China? Why should we support the NBA if they're stifling free speech? Let's take a stand in this economic war. If the NBA is so worried about Chinese dollars, maybe they should stop taking American dollars for granted. And we should pray. Pray for the people of Hong Kong. Pray for the people of Turkey. Pray for liberty around the world. And pray that we don't give up our precious right to free speech here in the United States. Now, we've shared the bad, attacks on our freedoms. We've shared the good, some things you can do about it, including weaponizing your money. Be sure to go to economicwarroom.com and sign up to receive this week's free battle plan. Now let's talk about something beautiful. A single voice of courage has made a difference many times in our world. We've spoken of Winston Churchill, who almost stood alone against Hitler's tyranny. Sometimes, though, the voice of courage is lost to history, but that doesn't mean it didn't make a difference. I recently read the story of Mrs. Rena Finder. She's a Schindler's List Holocaust survivor now living in the United States. She was born in Krakow, Poland in 1929. She's an amazing voice of courage. Here's one part of her story from facinghistory.org. It says, one morning, a guard falsely accused one of her fellow inmates. Even though she risked severe punishment and possibly death, Mrs. Finder stood up to defend her. The guard ordered Mrs. Finder back to the line, but she refused. Instead, she stood in one place for the entire day. Finally, a different guard ordered her back to the evening roll call. Mrs. Finder explained to us that she stood up in order to feel like an individual in a place where people were being treated as though they were animals or worse. Mrs. Finder demonstrated courage. She used her voice to save another, and she survived under the worst of circumstances. She used her voice. Liberate Hong Kong. It is a revolution for our time. This is a war of ideas, but it's also an economic war. We must defend the First Amendment. That's why we need a battle plan. Get yours at economicwarroom.com. Remember, what we see as a marketplace, our enemies view as a battle space. This is Kevin Freeman from the Economic War Room.